The Iliad is one of the oldest and most famous stories in Western literature, an epic poem, composed for oral performance, recited aloud from memory long before it was ever written down. Just under 15,700 lines of it. Tradition credits it to a poet named Homer, sometime around the 8th century BCE. But nothing about Homer is actually verified. No birth record, no contemporary account that he ever existed. Scholars still argue whether Homer was one person, a name shared by generations of bards, or a label attached after the fact. What we're certain of is the poem, not the man. And here's what most people think that poem actually contains. A 10-year siege that ends when the Greeks build a hollow wooden horse, sneak it inside the walls of Troy, and burn the city to the ground, while Achilles takes an arrow through the heel and dies a hero's death. None of that happens. Not one page of it. The actual poem doesn't include the horse. It doesn't include the fall of Troy. It ends with Achilles very much alive. What it covers is a stretch of roughly 51 days, near the end of that war. The story begins 9 years into the war. A Trojan prince named Paris had taken Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, back to Troy with him. Whether she went willingly is a question the poem never bothers to settle. Menelaus's brother Agamemnon rallied an alliance of Greek kings and sailed across the Aegean to take her back by force. 9 years in, neither side has broken. The poem opens with a plague. Agamemnon has taken a captive named Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo named Chrysis. Her father offers a fortune in ransom. Agamemnon refuses. So Chrysis prays to his god for vengeance, and Apollo answers by sending 9 days of sickness through the Greek camp. Only when the prophet Calchas names the cause does Agamemnon agree to let her go. He won't simply absorb the loss quietly, though. He compensates himself by seizing Briseis, a woman who'd been awarded to Achilles, the single greatest fighter in the Greek army, as a prize of honor from an earlier raid. For Achilles, this was never really about Briseis. In this army, prizes like her were also proof of status, handed out publicly, in front of the entire camp as a mark of a warrior's standing. Losing hers to Agamemnon wasn't just a loss, it was a public downgrade. So he responds the only way his pride allows. He withdraws from the war completely. He asks his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, to go to Zeus directly. His request? Let the Trojans win, until Agamemnon understands exactly what he threw away. Zeus agrees, and without the best fighter in their army, the Greeks start losing. Without Achilles, Hector, Troy's largest warrior, leads the counterattack, and the war swings hard toward the Trojans. The gods openly meddle on both sides, propping up favorites, settling grudges mid-battle. In one of the poem's quietest scenes, Hector pauses at the city gates before heading back out to fight. He says goodbye to his wife, Andromache, and their infant son, Astyanax. It's a farewell that reads less like the language of legend and more like the language of anyone who's ever left for a war they weren't certain they'd survive. He goes back out anyway. Eventually, the Trojans push the Greeks all the way back to their own ships, and a desperate Agamemnon finally offers Achilles everything. A fortune and treasure, Briseis returned, untouched, he swears. Everything except the one thing he never actually offers, an apology. Achilles refuses. The insult was never really about the woman or the wealth. It was about being told, publicly, that he didn't matter as much as he'd assumed. And no gift fixes that particular wound. With the Greek line on the verge of collapse, Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, begs to fight in his place. He'll wear Achilles' armor. The sight of it alone might send the Trojans running. Achilles agrees. On one condition: push them back and stop there. Do not pursue. Patroclus ignores him completely. He fights brilliantly. He routs the Trojan advance, and he keeps going anyway, until the god Apollo himself strikes him dazed and knocks the armor loose. A Trojan spear catches him, and Hector finishes him. Hector strips Achilles' armor from the body and takes it as a trophy. What happens to Achilles next isn't grief, exactly. It curdles almost immediately into something closer to a second rage, worse than the one that started all of this. His mother arranges for the god Hephaestus to forge him a new set of armor, overnight, and Achilles returns to the war, not to win it, to make Hector personally answer for what happened to Patroclus. What follows is less a battle than a slaughter. Achilles kills so many Trojans that the river god's commander, called Xanthus by the gods themselves, rises up against him personally. He's furious that the bodies are choking his own current. Achilles fights the river directly. He nearly drowns in it. Only another god, Hephaestus, saves him, driving the water back with fire. He finally corners Hector just outside the walls of Troy. Hector has spent the entire poem being the more human of the two men, the one with a wife, a son, a city depending on him. He tries to run. Achilles chases him 3 full times around the city walls. Hector only turns to make his stand because the goddess Athena tricks him, disguised as his brother, promising backup that never comes. He dies by Achilles' spear. It still isn't enough. Achilles ties the body to the back of his chariot and drags it back to camp. Then he keeps dragging it, keeps mutilating the corpse for days afterward. In a culture where a body denied proper burial is denied its place in memory forever, this isn't ordinary cruelty. By the story's own logic, it's worse than the killing itself. Even the gods eventually decide Achilles has gone too far. Funeral games are held for Patroclus, races, contests, prizes handed out in his memory. And slowly, something in Achilles starts to loosen. Then Zeus sends the god Hermes to guide an old man secretly through the entire Greek camp at night. Priam, king of Troy, Hector's own father, carrying a fortune in ransom, walking unarmed straight into the tent of the man who killed his son. Priam kneels. He takes Achilles' hands, the same hands that killed Hector, and begs. And Achilles, for the first time in the whole poem, doesn't answer with rage or pride. He weeps. Not for Hector, for his own father, who he knows he'll never see again. For Patroclus, for every loss his pride was never going to fix. Priam weeps too, for his son. 2 enemies, sitting together in a firelit tent, crying over 2 different bodies for the exact same reason. Achilles agrees to return Hector's corpse. He halts the fighting, long enough for a funeral. The Trojans mourn for 9 days. They burn his body on the 10th. And that's where the poem ends. No horse, no burning city, no death of Achilles. Just an old king and the man who killed his son, both undone by the same grief in a war everyone had agreed was about glory, until it turned out, in the end, to be about something much smaller and much harder. 2 men who couldn't stop burying the people they loved.